Moving into a new place always comes with its own set of challenges and surprises. For my wife, Emily, and me, it was the promise of a fresh start. We had found an old, charming apartment building in the heart of the city, its vintage architecture standing out amidst the modern high-rises. It was exactly the kind of place we had dreamed of living in. Little did we know, this building had more secrets than its antique facade suggested. The day we moved in, I remember feeling a strange mix of excitement and unease. The hallways were dimly lit, the wallpaper peeling in places, but it had character. "It just needs a little TLC," Emily said optimistically as she unpacked a box of kitchenware. I nodded, trying to shake off the feeling that we were being watched. Our first encounter with our neighbors was unusual, to say the least. As we struggled to maneuver our couch through the narrow hallway, a man appeared at the end of the corridor. He was tall, with an old-fashioned suit and a stern expression. I waved, hoping to make a good impression, but he merely turned and disappeared around the corner without acknowledging us. "Friendly bunch," I muttered under my breath. Emily shot me a reassuring smile, but I could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. Over the next few days we met more of our neighbors. There was Mrs. Whitmore, an elderly lady who seemed to float rather than walk, her long gray hair flowing behind her. She had a vacant look in her eyes and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Then there was the young girl, Sarah, who wore a white dress and often played with a faded teddy bear in the hallway. She never spoke to us, only stared with a forlorn expression that made my skin crawl. One night, as Emily and I settled into bed, we heard strange noises coming from the apartment next door. It sounded like faint, mournful cries and the crackling of a fire. "Do you hear that?" Emily whispered, clutching my arm. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. The noises continued for a few minutes before abruptly stopping, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to speak to the building superintendent, Mr. Harris, the next day. He was a grizzled old man, always seen tinkering with something in the basement. When I brought up the strange noises and the odd behavior of our neighbors, he gave me a long, hard look. "This building has a history," he finally said, his voice gravelly. "There was a fire here decades ago. Most of the residents didn't make it out. Some say their spirits still linger, bound to this place by the tragedy that took their lives." A chill ran down my spine. Ghosts? Spirits bound to the building? It sounded absurd, but the eerie occurrences and our strange neighbors suddenly made a twisted kind of sense. That night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I felt a cold breeze brush against my face. I sat up, my eyes scanning the room. In the dim light, I saw a figure standing by the window, its form barely distinguishable. It was the man in the old-fashioned suit, his eyes staring right at me. "Leave while you still can," he whispered, his voice echoing in the silence of the room. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. I lay back down, my mind racing. Emily stirred beside me, mumbling in her sleep. I knew I couldn't tell her what I had seen. It would only scare her more. But deep down, I knew we had to find a way to uncover the truth about this building and its ghostly inhabitants. Our lives depended on it. The next morning, Emily and I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. It was a bright, sunny day, and we hoped some fresh air might help clear our minds. As we strolled through the nearby park, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. "Do you think something's off about this place?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. She looked at me with concern, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. "I do," I admitted, taking her hand. "I spoke to Mr. Harris yesterday. He said there was a fire here years ago. Most of the residents died, and some say their spirits are still here." Emily's eyes widened. "You mean ghosts?" "Yeah," I said, feeling the weight of the word. "Ghosts." We walked in silence for a few minutes, both of us lost in thought. Finally, Emily spoke up. "We need to find out more about what happened here. Maybe if we understand their story, we can help them move on." I nodded, grateful for her determination. "Let's start with the library. There should be old newspapers and records about the fire." The local library was a quiet, dusty place with rows of ancient books and microfilm machines. We spent hours poring over old newspaper clippings and documents, piecing together the tragic history of our building. The fire had occurred in 1947, claiming the lives of nearly all the residents. The cause was never determined, but rumors of foul play and unsolved mysteries surrounded the event. We learned about the people who had lived there: Mr. Whitmore, a successful businessman, his wife, Mrs. Whitmore, who had been a well-known socialite, and their young daughter, Sarah, who had loved to play with her teddy bear. There were also other residents, including a musician named Thomas, and a schoolteacher named Eleanor. All of them had perished in the blaze. As we read, I began to feel a deep sense of sorrow for these lost souls. They had been ordinary people, living their lives, only to be cut short by a horrific tragedy. No wonder their spirits lingered, unable to find peace. Armed with this knowledge, Emily and I returned to our apartment that evening. We decided to hold a small memorial for the victims of the fire, hoping to show them that they were remembered and respected. We gathered candles and flowers, setting them up in the hallway outside our door. As we lit the candles, the air around us seemed to change. The usual chill was replaced by a gentle warmth, and the oppressive feeling of being watched lifted slightly. Emily and I stood together holding hands as we whispered words of remembrance and offered our condolences to the spirits. For a moment everything was quiet. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the faint outline of Mrs. Whitmore, her eyes no longer vacant but filled with a deep sadness. She gave a slow, solemn nod before fading away. That night, as we lay in bed, the strange noises returned, but this time they were different. Instead of mournful cries, we heard soft, distant laughter and the faint sound of a piano playing a gentle melody. It was as if the spirits were finally finding some measure of peace. Emily squeezed my hand. "I think we're on the right track," she said softly. I nodded, feeling a renewed sense of hope. We had made a connection with the spirits, and now we needed to find a way to help them move on completely. But how? The answers still eluded us, hidden in the shadows of our haunted home. The next day, Emily and I decided to explore the building further, hoping to find more clues that might help us understand what was keeping the spirits tethered to this place. We started with the basement, a dark and dusty maze of old storage rooms and boiler equipment. Mr. Harris had given us a set of keys, and as we opened the first door, we were hit by a musty smell, and the sight of forgotten belongings covered in cobwebs. Among the old furniture and boxes, we found a photo album. Flipping through its pages, we saw black and white pictures of the building's former residents. There was Mr. Whitmore with his stern expression, Mrs. Whitmore looking elegant in a long dress, and little Sarah holding her teddy bear. We also found pictures of the other residents, including Thomas, the musician, with his piano, and Eleanor, the schoolteacher, standing in front of a classroom. These images made the ghosts more real to us, their lives more tangible. As we delved deeper into the basement, we came across a locked room. The key fit, and with a creak, the door swung open. Inside, we found a small, shrine-like setup, charred belongings, melted candles, and what appeared to be old, handwritten letters. Emily picked up one of the letters, carefully unfolding the fragile paper. It was a love letter from Thomas to Eleanor, dated just a few days before the fire. It spoke of their plans to run away together, away from the oppressive life they felt trapped in. Reading their words, I could feel the desperation and love they had for each other. Maybe their plans were discovered, Emily speculated. Maybe that's what caused the fire. It was a chilling thought, but it made sense. Perhaps someone had set the fire deliberately to prevent their escape, and the spirits were now bound by the unfinished business and unfulfilled dreams. We took the letters and photo album back to our apartment, determined to find a way to help the spirits move on. That night, we arranged the items in our living room, hoping the ghosts might see them and feel a sense of closure. As we sat quietly, waiting, the room grew cold. One by one the spirits appeared. Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore, Sarah, Thomas, and Eleanor. They looked at the items with a mix of sorrow and longing. "We know what happened to you," Emily said softly. "We want to help you find peace." Thomas and Eleanor exchanged a glance, their ghostly forms shimmering. "We were so close," Thomas whispered, his voice filled with regret. "You can still be together," I said. "You can move on, all of you." Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears. "We never had a chance to say goodbye," she said, her voice breaking. "You can now," Emily said, her own eyes wet with tears. "Say your goodbyes and find the peace you deserve." One by one, the spirits began to speak, their voices mingling with the sound of the crackling fire from decades past. They shared their final words, their regrets, and their hopes. It was a poignant and heart-wrenching moment. As the last words were spoken, a soft glow enveloped the room. The spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the light. Mrs. Whitmore smiled at us, her expression one of gratitude and peace. "Thank you," she whispered as she vanished. The room fell silent, the coldness replaced by a comforting warmth. Emily and I sat there holding hands, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. We had helped the spirits find peace, but the journey had also changed us. We had uncovered the building's tragic past and faced the ghosts of its history. Now, it was time to move forward, to live our lives fully, just as the spirits had finally moved on. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the building changed. The oppressive heaviness that had once hung in the air was gone, replaced by a sense of tranquility. Emily and I felt more at ease in our apartment, no longer haunted by strange noises or eerie sightings. One evening, as we were settling into our new routine, Mr. Harris knocked on our door. He looked different, less burdened, more at peace. "I heard what you did," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I don't know how you managed it, but thank you. The building feels lighter." "We're just glad we could help," Emily replied, smiling. As Mr. Harris turned to leave, he paused. "There's one more thing you should know. The fire wasn't an accident. I found this," he said, handing me an old charred diary. It belonged to Eleanor. We sat down with the diary, our hearts heavy with anticipation. As we read through its pages, we discovered the final piece of the puzzle. Eleanor had written about her suspicions. She believed Mr. Whitmore had discovered her and Thomas's plans to elope, and had set the fire in a fit of rage and jealousy. Her last entry was a desperate plea for help, written just before the fire consumed everything. "He was trying to control everything, even in death," I said, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "We need to do something," Emily said firmly. "We need to make sure the truth is known." We decided to hold a meeting with the building's residents, both living and spectral. We gathered in the lobby, where the remaining ghosts joined us, more visible and at peace than before. Emily and I shared what we had found, and the reactions were a mix of shock and relief. Mrs. Whitmore appeared, looking more vibrant than ever. "Thank you for uncovering the truth," she said. "It's time to finally let go of the past." Thomas and Eleanor appeared next, hand in hand. "We can move on now," Thomas said, his voice filled with a sense of completion. The final moments were a blur of emotions. The ghosts began to glow, their forms becoming more transparent until they vanished into the light, leaving behind a sense of closure and peace. As the last ghost disappeared, the building seemed to sigh in relief. The air felt lighter, the shadows less menacing. Emily and I stood together, feeling the weight of the past lift from our shoulders. "We did it," she whispered, leaning into me. "We helped them find peace. And ourselves too," I replied, holding her close. The days turned into weeks, and life in the apartment building returned to normal. Emily and I continued to make our home there, but now it felt truly ours. We had faced the ghosts of the past and come out stronger, our bond deepened by the experience. Every now and then, we would find small reminders of our ghostly neighbors, a faint echo of laughter, a whisper of music, a fleeting shadow, but these were no longer frightening. They were gentle reminders of the lives that had once filled these walls and the peace we had helped them find. Our journey with the ghosts had come to an end, but their memory lived on, woven into the fabric of our lives. And as we moved forward, we did so with a sense of gratitude and a deeper understanding of the power of love, forgiveness, and the importance of facing the past to find peace in the present.